Okay, everything is wonderfully dry, and we're going to be able to, finish up our this page. But this page, the very last step, as far as getting the page complete or ready for us to do our journaling, is to simply add some white. And I'm going to use gesso intentionally because I want to take any shine off of this that is there. Now, yesterday I said I thought I wanted to dry brush it, but I think actually what I want to do, or I'm going to do, and have you guys do, is just do a wash, because a wash will still show the shadow here, and maybe it won't be quite as dark, and we can always tweak it if we need to. And then it should give it a hint of that gritty texture from the gesso. So I'm just going to dip into gesso and put some down. Now what I don't want to do is have to remix a wash again later. So I'm going to get plenty of it down. But then I'm going to use water. Now I could use matte medium or glazing medium, but they're going to change the surface texture. So instead I'm just going to use water, and this is out of water, so I'll get a new one. Oops, no, and I started dropping stuff, so alright, so I have some water down there, and I'm just going to keep mixing it until I think I've gotten the opacity that I want. I can always add more gesso into it and put another layer down if I think that it's too transparent, but I'd hate to have to either take the gesso off or start painting all over again because it got it too opaque. So I've added quite a bit of water. There's no measuring involved in this, at least not for me. I just kind of go with what I think feels right. And then I'm just going to start, I'm going to turn it like this, I think. I'm just going to start down here and see whether or not I like, yeah, that's really nice. That's fine. I did wipe my brush off on my paint rag just to get the excess gesso that might have been in the brush. So now I'm just going to paint all the way around on the background. Try not to go up onto my actual medallion. You do see some brush strokes when you put a wash down, but usually if you just go over it a time or two, you get rid of most of them. And a little bit of brush strokes I don't think is going to bother me with this particular page and this technique that we're using. So I tend to wipe off some of the excess before I place the brush down, and then I just sort of blend with that. If it starts drying on you, just add a little water, and then you can just move everything around again. And I always put my fingers on my edges and then have edges that don't match. So I'm going to go around again. You do want to work a little bit quickly depending on your environment. My environment, this is going to dry super fast because the water is going to evaporate so quickly, because although it's very humid here, and a lot of people think, well, it's really humid there, so there should be a lot of water in the air, moisture in the air, and it should take longer to dry. But the truth is that it's so hot that everything evaporates into the air as quickly as it can. Unless I was actually in the direct sunlight, that it's going to evaporate quickly. And I'm obviously in my studio, not in the sunlight. And I don't turn the air conditioning on until I absolutely have to, because I get sick and tired, not sick as in really sick, but mentally sick and tired of breathing air conditioning, what we call down here canned air, all year long. And we get maybe 2 months or so of cold weather, and the rest of it is hot. We don't have like everyone else, pretty much gets spring, and then they even get fall. Here we get fall for like, I don't know, 2 weeks in late November or sometimes, mid-November. Usually I get frustrated at Thanksgiving because I have to turn the air conditioning on because the oven heats everything up so much. And there have been times where when we had a fireplace at Christmas, we would turn the air on so that we could run the fireplace. That was back in the day, though, before I realized what a complete waste of energy that was. So, and no longer have a fireplace anyway. Okay, so we're done with the whitewash. I think it looks really great. Very happy with it, and I think it really made this look more like a solid piece. But I am going to let it dry before I, completely make my decision. And then that way, too, it will be dry when I go to write on it. So I'm going to set it aside. And we're going to start with this one. Now, for me, this is, so much fun to do this process that I'm going to show you. The key to it is working quickly. And you are really supposed to use a more quality paint for this, for the simple reason that a shinier paint is easier to remove, which sounds crazy, but it is. It's easier to remove than a matte paint. However, even though I'm using craft paint. I'm actually going to use Folk Art Aqua. But I'm actually going to put some retarder in. I'll show you. This is retarder. Basically, it's somewhere in between glazing medium and thinner that you would use if you were using acrylics. And what it does is it allows the paint to have a a largely increased drying time. So I use retarder also because it has a hint of, it will give it a hint of a glossy effect. And that's just a little trick. If you have a lot of craft paints and you like to work with them and you like the price of them, invest in an expensive retarder or an expensive glazing medium and add them to your paints. And believe me, many times I've had people ask me, oh, is that golden, or is that Liquitex, what is that paint? And it's just craft paint, but they can't tell because it has retarder in it. Alright, so I'm just going to put out a little bit of paint, and again I'm still using that angled brush so that it will help me hopefully with these edges a bit. And actually no, now that I think about it, I'm painting the entire thing. I don't even need to use the angled brush. I can go with a much larger, silly me, a much larger brush and work a lot faster. So I'm actually going to need a lot more paint. So I'm going to put my paint out. Now, when we get done painting it, depending on how wet it is, we're either going to let it dry a little bit and then try to wipe it off, or we're going to wipe off immediately. We might even, depending on your environment, you might have to stop halfway and remove paint. Or you may have to just resort to using alcohol on your rag. For removing the paint, you want a wet, not like drippy wet, but not a dry cloth. And I wouldn't use baby wipes only because most baby wipes have a little bit of a cleaner in them. And you really just want water. You don't want to soap up the paint. You just want to pull it off. And you actually, depending on how large your page is, you might need to have a couple, because the same thing when you're removing with alcohol. Once an area gets saturated with color, it's not going to remove anymore. So you might end up having to have two, but we'll see how we go. I'm going to start out by painting the outside first, because I know that I don't have to worry about as far as getting it back off, because we're not going to take it off of the background. So I'm just going to quickly sort of paint the background right up to the edges. Might even get a little bit on the edges. I'm not too stressed about it, simply because I know I can get the paint back off with alcohol. So if it dries on me, I'm not stressing about it. And you can see why I wanted to use the blue as the underlayer, because it's slightly a different shade. It's still in the blue family, and this aqua indeed has blue in it, but also because it gives a nice depth below this aqua color. And I know you might think, well, that aqua's pretty opaque, but it's actually a lot less opaque right now than it was, because I put retarder in it. And retarder, if you put anything in your paint, it automatically thins it a bit. So now that I have the outside edges, I can start painting my whole medallion. And I'm going to get more paint out because I know I'm going to need it. I'm actually going to dip my brush into a little tiny bit of water, not a lot, but it's nice to have a wet brush, at least a damp brush when you do this. So I'm just going to go inside out, nice and quick. You do want to get all the nooks and crannies, so you are going to be kind of scrubbing, so keep that in mind when you choose which brush to use. And it looks like I'm going to end up having to get more paint out. I always underestimate how much paint I need. It's a little nerve-wracking. Also, too, by putting that glossy base under there that we did first, will help the paint to remove. So keep that in mind as well. It's slick underneath of it there, so it should help us in getting our paint back off. Now, just like with anything textured, you want to kind of move it around to make certain that you can see you've covered everything. You've gotten down in all the nooks and crannies. It's so easy to miss one until you turn it, and then you realize, oh look, there's bright white peeking out here. It's not so detrimental with this, because the blue and the green kind of go together, but you can still tell when you've missed something. Okay, and then it gets a little tricky because I run out of places to hold on to it. So try to stay down to the last possible amount before I had to move my fingers. So now I can come back and I can touch up anywhere that I think I've missed on the outside edges, or where my thumbprints have made a mark. So I'm actually just going to go straight into wiping away. Now the key to doing this is it does need to be good and wet. So I'm actually going to take my spray bottle and I'm just saturating the area that I'm going to be using. And then you want to wrap it over 1 or 2 fingers and get it tight, but you don't want this to fall down onto your piece. So I just tuck it into the palm of my hand. Now I've done this for at least a few years now. I actually did that to show you and did the wrong hand. So I'm a little bit better at it. it's not imperative. If you get what you want to avoid is you want to avoid these flat areas. Those would not have been gilded if you think about it. It would have only been the raised areas. And this piece has a lot of flat but raised areas, so keep that in mind. Yours may or may not. If you did the plaster like this one, you won't have very many raised areas. So as I gently try to wipe it off, it looks like the gold might be, either there's not a lot of gold on here or the gold is coming off. And I'll be really frustrated if that's the case. No, it's just not a lot of gold on here. So you can see here where I wiped it off down there. So I'll end up having to touch that up. This area is a lot less tricky because most of it is flat surface. In fact, I can just fold this and go over it. And I need to get more water on here. The trick is to have plenty of water on it, but not to have it dripping down onto your page. And not letting the tail of it drag across the page is also important. So you just keep turning your cloth so that you're getting back to a clean area and keeping it wet as you go along. The first one of these I did following the instructions from the original artist that I was learning how to do texture painting from. I was actually dipping it into water, but I was working on a big canvas, so. You can tell when you've saturated it because it stops removing and you feel like you're rubbing more than you had to before. That's usually because you've got a bunch of color on there. You can also do this with paper towel, but for whatever reason, I don't quite know why exactly. It seems to work better for me with a more cloth-like item, so that's why I use my paint rags. Right now I'm trying to get the bulky areas. I'll come back in and get some of the smaller areas as I go, or as I'm, once I'm done. And I'm kind of trying to work outwards carefully. When you get to the edge, you need to work from the inside out, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I've been working this way, so now I kind of want to work this way so that I can keep from hopefully removing too much off of the actual background. I don't think I got enough gold on this. Maybe I should have used a thicker product. I will more than likely end up having to supplement. You don't have to supplement if you got a good coverage of gold, whereas I use such a pale gold that I think that, now this has got, I can't really find a lot of areas that are clear, so I'm going to switch to a new paint rag, and I'm just going to onto the floor, I'm just soaking this thing with water. These are very, very absorbent, so I have to get a lot of water on it. Videos are getting seriously long, so I'm going to try to make this quick. I don't need to worry too much about the very edges because they can look a little bit worn, and that'll be fine. I mainly just want to get these flat areas. Those were my biggest concern, was that they look a little bit different. I'm even considering right now going ahead and putting a little bit of that other blue into there. Just so that, because right now it just kind of feels an awful lot like it looks like the wall. So I'm just going to touch my brush into a little bit of that blue, which is the processed magenta that I love. So I'm just going to put a little bit of that in here. And because I'm doing it over the gloss medium, it's going to be very transparent. And it's going to sit down into a lot of the nooks and crannies. And that'll be great because that'll help give us a hint of, basically of depth, because the little nooks and crannies will appear to be darker than the flatter surfaces. I'm intentionally trying to shove it down, get it to build up in those nooks and crannies. So I'm pushing kind of hard. You can see it's already, even the varnish is already starting to dry on me. That's just part and parcel of painting here. And one of the reasons that I love oils so much, because the oils stay wet far longer. I do even have this problem with my oils, especially if I forget to refrigerate them and leave the palette out at night. They get kind of dry. Alright, so I actually made it look a little less glossy by over brushing it once it was dry. So I'm just going to add a little more gloss to it. I try not to complain too much about my environment because I would rather live in Florida where it's humid and be hot than live anywhere where it's cold. So I try not to complain, but it can be frustrating because everything dries so quickly. Alright, so now I'm just looking to make sure that I don't have any areas that are super thick with the glossy stuff that I didn't move around. And I'm going to go ahead and show you this page completed. The pictures I think are going to be a lot better. Let me see if I can literally just get rid of this light. It's bright daylight outside. Camera should auto adjust. Well, not so great. But let me kind of like move it away a little bit. Nothing really helps, does it? Let me try the overhead light. Hold on just a minute. Whee, how's that? That's a little bit better, huh? Let me try turning this spotlight off. No, it's still kind of dark without that light. I just have to have that light. But that light is like so obnoxious. One of these days I'll get the lighting in here fixed a little bit, maybe. So I just gave it a little title. Jeez. I hope it looks better on your screen than I can see it on mine. And then I actually did my journaling, which is kind of hard to see, but it's down here in white gel pen. So then really I would just do the same thing for this one, and I'm not even going to title this one. I'm debating, does it need a title? I guess I'll give it a title. I think I can think of something I might have thought of something already. And this is really, really still probably wet in places, so I'm just going to keep my hand out of it as best I can. I don't know if this will show or not on this color. We'll see when that dries. I think you're still going to be able to see it. I'm going to go ahead and journal with the finer tipped end of this. Alright, I think that was probably not the best surface to use this pen on. I really don't like these markers. I'm a mixed media artist, and if I have a marker that isn't mixed media-ish, I don't like it. And these don't like chalk. They don't like any of the surfaces that I usually write on. I do want to see if I can find a black gel pen. Good luck. Let me see if I have any open. This one might work, although it is a fine tip. I just want to add a little bit of definition to these, the title up here. Oh, it's sticky. It's sticky, and even my gel pen doesn't want to write over those markers. They're just not the markers for me, I believe. All right, I'm not going to heat dry it. You guys, I think, are, you can see, and I'm going to post photos, so you'll have photos that you can look at. Lighting. So I just titled this one Simple Beauty. And my journaling's down there, but it's like almost impossible to read it. But that's okay. I like it that way. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. So today we did another, or not today. With this page we did another of the 2-for-1s. I am going to trim that off over there. And then this one I was doing, it's still really, really wet. I was just playing with, this was the one that I did the larger circles. This looks like a little bit like a crop circle. I was thinking about that when I was journaling. Excuse me. Anyway, this was the paper that I was doing the crop circles on. And I just started, using my spray inks and lots of water. And I'm just going to keep going and build up a bunch of layers. And I'll probably just post this like on my Instagram or somewhere. Since it's not really part of the lesson. This was almost a 3-for, huh? Well, anyway, and I just took a stencil and just with a wet brush with ink, brushed and moved the stencil around on the 4 corners. But my goal when this is all done is, I'm hoping anyway, is that I'll have a lot more even than I have now. A lot of color on here. Did I say a lot enough yet? And then I'm going to sand the plaster down. Not completely down or anything, but I'm going to take the color off of it. So it's the only thing that's really white and pops out. But I'm letting layers dry as I go. Excuse me. but I will show you kind of what I'm doing. So I've got my big, huge, fat, flat brush. Now my paint water is just coming out pure aqua. So basically, I'm just taking my inks. So like right now, I'm going to do some more yellow. Now yellow and purple will make like a brownish color. So if you want to turn it more of an antique color, it's great to mix them. If you don't, then you want to try to avoid those areas, you know, to a point. But all I'm doing is taking and spraying my color on. So like I want lots of yellow, and it'll take me a while. It'll take me, you know, a day or two to really build up these colors the way I want. And then I just have a really damp brush. I'll even dip it into water and then just kind of wipe it off on my paint rag. And then I just move it around. Let the puddles do their own thing. This is very much the same process as the puddled trees that we did, oh, way back in the beginning of the class. I want a little bit of yellow up here, but I don't want too much browny, icky. I don't want it to be antique looking or vintage. So I don't want to put too much up there. And then I also go and hit it with water. And I'm more or less trying to hit the outer edges. And I just spray right over it. But my goal is that those outer edges have water so that that color sort of seeps out. You get less of that seeping over time because you really start saturating the paper with, because these are acrylic based inks, so you kind of saturate the paper with acrylic, so it stops acting as much like paper. But it takes a while before that starts to happen to you. Now I'm going to put blue on, and the blue I can easily mix with the like pinkish purple and get a, you know, more of a purple, so I don't have to avoid so much. And if it gets in with the actually I'm going to do purple now that I say that, because if it gets in with the yellow, it just makes it green. So now I want to just avoid most of those yellow areas. And I just spray kind of slow when I'm trying to practice avoidance. Oh, funny, funny. There's some up here. And then some over here. So now, again, I'm going to rinse my brush and get the yellow out of it. Go back into my water, and now I'm just going to move some of my purple around. As I build up, I just cannot talk today. Let's just admit it. I just am going so quick I can't even get the words out. As you build up these layers over time, you're going to add less extra water and do less of this and more of just spraying and letting it pool and letting it sit, because you know you're covering more and more areas, so it's getting darker and darker. But it's also good to leave just some little areas that stay light, just not white, but so that you get kind of some tonal value going on. All right, so that done, I'm going to rinse yet again. Whoops, now I'm flinging water everywhere. And I'm going to add my blues. I'm going to dip into the water. For this process, it's really awesome to do all of the colors while they're all wet so that things can blend in together. If you've ever, if you have an interest in making things like this, go on to YouTube and search acrylic paint pouring or acrylic pouring, and see the acrylic pouring process, and you'll kind of start to, we're not, with the pouring they move it around, and we're not actually moving this around because it's just thin paper. If this wasn't thin paper, yeah, I would move it around. I'm going to get kind of crazy now since this one can mix with everything. But check out some of the painters who work in the pouring acrylic medium or genre or style. They're just amazing, and you'll kind of get an idea of how, and I think probably watercolor artists feel this way when they look at their watercolors, because you can do this as well with, sort of like with watercolors. Although I think with the difference there would be the multiple layers would probably erode into each other. I'm not sure. Similar though, in my mind anyway, it's kind of similar to some of the things I've seen done with watercolor. So now I'm just kind of mixing up and messing up the pools, letting it get muddy. It doesn't really get muddy because these colors all work together, and you notice I'm only using 3 colors. There's a reason, and that's because I know these 3 colors will work well, and because I don't have any other colors in sprays right now.